Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us a special guest, Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor in the Finance Ministry, as also Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund on India's behalf. And he's here with us to discuss the impact of GDP growth on elections. Dr. Virmani has done some recent work, statistical work, trying to establish the correlation between growth and electoral outcome. So we'll focus our discussion on that. Welcome to our show, Dr. Arvind Virmani. So you recently wrote an interesting article which became a subject of debate, where you actually tried to correlate GDP growth in various 5-year phases coinciding with electoral India's elections, and you came to certain conclusions. Could you talk about it?
So what it is the paper looks at the last 3 elections, starting from the 99 election onwards. And what it does is it looks at the economic determinants or impact of on elections.
Okay.
So basically, as far as economics is concerned, there are 3 factors. One is economic growth, which determines your general amount of income you have, the job opportunities you have, etc. The second one has to do with what we call, commonly is called Bijli Pani Sadak, but in economic terms we call public goods, and final is the welfare payment. So
the second would flow from the first in some sense, growth, infrastructure.
So because it requires revenues to do that. So the main focus of the kind of data analysis is on the growth factor. So what I show is that in the 2004 elections, the growth rate in the previous 5 years had actually increased very marginally. It was not strong enough to make the incumbent win.
The NDA period,
The NDA period.
So you're saying the India Shining slogan was a bit overdone,
So when they said India Shining, the people couldn't feel it shining. The growth had not really accelerated significantly.
Although in the last year they got 8%.
That's right. So my model says it's for the common man. You see, it's not, he doesn't get into very sophisticated arguments. For example, there were a lot of negative factors. But what I said is that the common man doesn't do analysis. How much is it due to bad monsoon? How much is due to the war?
Or international factors.
There could be all kinds of factors. There were factors.
For instance, currently it's because of a lot of international factors.
That's right. So that was the 2004. But what happened from 2004 to 2009 was there was a huge increase in growth rate, about 70%. That is an impact you can feel. So the result of it was the personal income, the average income of the average person went up tremendously during this 5 years period. And the result was they voted overwhelmingly for the Congress.
Congress got the highest number of seats.
So, so based on that, so those were the 2 elections I looked at, and on the basis of that, what I predict is that in the 2009 to 2014 period, the growth rate has again gone down by about 20% roughly. Of course, these latest numbers are even worse, so maybe a little more worse than that. And the impact of that will be what will be a vote against the Congress.
Okay, when you say growth rate has gone down by 20%, what you're taking the average of the 5 years, previous 5 years, which is about 8.5, right?
Less than that. Less than 8.
Less than 8, and the average of the last 5 years would be what?
About 6 or so.
So you're saying that
8 to 6.
From 8% to 6% is a 20% drop. You're saying,
right.
Okay.
So what the impact of that? Obviously, a 70% increase is huge. 20% is still significant, right? So that will have a strong negative effect on the Congress parties.
So you're saying that the average GDP growth from 2004 to 2009 during the Congress-led rule was how much more than the NDA period, previous 5 years?
About 70%.
70% more than
It's a huge jump.
Huge jump, okay. So they reaped the benefit of that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So when something like 4 to let's say 7%, actually not 8. Something like roughly 4% per annum. Incidentally, this all has to be in per capita terms because we are talking about people. How do they feel it? Is the average person's income has gone up by 4% in that NDA period. and around 7%.
Okay, sure.
In the next one.
So currently the UPA is arguing that quite cleverly that they're taking the block of 10 years starting in 2004, and they're saying that 136 million people have come out of the poverty line, have come above poverty line over that period. Now, well, you're suggesting that the benefit of that they've already got in 2009. Exactly. So you have to look at how many people have actually improved their lives post 2009.
Absolutely.
Right?
That is the point I'm making.
So is there a way of calculating that? I mean,
yeah, we have the numbers. Okay. And so that's what I'm saying, that the common person is...
No, I'm talking about in numbers in terms of people having come out of poverty.
Yeah, we have poverty numbers for 2004. 2009 and 2011. So you really only have 2 years of 9 to 11. No?
Okay, okay.
So it's a little, see, because for per capita income to translate into poverty, because we only do surveys, right, at 5-year intervals, while GDP is available every year. Okay. So we can follow it more closely on that.
But you can kind of intuitively argue that less people would have come out of poverty post 2009, and many more would have come out of poverty between 2004 and 2009.
But remember, we are not talking about an academic discussion here. Vote, everybody has one vote. So it doesn't matter whether it's a poor person or a rich person, right? It's one man, one vote. Remember, we are trying to see the impact on election. So poverty doesn't matter. It's the average income of whoever.
No, what I'm suggesting is if people come out of poverty, the person's lives have improved. So they might...
right, but everybody's lives will have improved.
Sure.
But the question is, they are saying, have they improved less or more than they did in the previous 5 years?
Sure, okay.
Because in the previous 5 years, they improved a lot, and they rewarded the incumbent, which was the Congress. Right?
So, Dr. Virmani, you are suggesting that when there is overwhelming improvement in GDP growth, it obviously shows in the lives of, in terms of experience of the common man, lives of people. So that leads to a better electoral outcome, which possibly was experienced across the world when during the boom period of 2003 to say 2009, many governments in the emerging markets where we had democracies, people did get re-elected. This has been the experience. So I'm just generally I'm just trying to extrapolate it. So do you think that it kind of reinforces what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm not sure what you're, because we are talking about the Indian electorate, right? Sure. And the Indian experience.
What I'm saying is that there was a boom in global growth in the period that India also experienced a boom, and we see that a lot of governments abroad also got. A lot of governments were elected or re-elected, and equally, when there's a decline in growth in the last 4-5 years, many governments got thrown out in Europe. So, say 6-7 governments got thrown out.
So the issue is to what extent and how growth affects electoral outcomes in other countries.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So definitely, I started this analysis based on what I had read about the US election. But the thing you got to remember is their voters are different. How? They are much more educated on average, right? We have a large segment which still lives in rural areas and doesn't follow economic things that closely yet. So
we are also...
So they are more short term. They may see things that what happened only in the last year or the year before. Remember, I said that I take a 5-year average because the person has to feel it, the common man in the village. People who can read, who can see statistics on employment come out every other month, it's a different story. So they may only look at the last year or so, or some people may look at 3 years. So one has to model that period for each country.
Sure. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Finance, as also India's Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund. Dr. Virmani, you've done this elaborate exercise where you've tried to see a correlation between growth and improvement in people's incomes, their experience of improvement in their lives over a period of 5-year period, and then and the impact on the electoral outcome. How do you read the previous 5 years in terms of number one, growth itself? Which political formation do you think, going by your analysis, today represents the growth agenda, perceived to be representing the growth agenda, and which political formation is not?
So we've been discussing the impact of growth on political outcomes. So clearly growth in the last 5 years has decelerated, and so what we can say with reasonable confidence is that the Congress is likely to do worse because of this factor, right? But there are other factors, as we kind of hinted.
What about redistribution? The Congress believed that it won 2009 elections so overwhelmingly, not just because of GDP growth, but also because they used growth and tax revenues to give a lot of social welfare to the people.
So there are three factors, right? So growth is one. Social, these welfare things are also there. I would call it the third factor, because remember, you have to tax somebody to get the numbers to give that money to somebody else. So it's negative, you know, it'll have negative effect on some people, positive on others. And if you don't use revenues and you use fiscal deficit, it could push up inflation. So we forget all those things. It's the net effect. No? It's not just I give you the money, but I have taken it from somebody else. So that guy may be unhappy. Remember, everybody has one vote. So you have to see the overall impact. Okay, and then there is, of course, what we commonly call Bijli Sadak Pani, but it has got associated now with governance or the supply of public goods, as we economists call it, right? And the corruption issue has come in there. So when we talk about corruption, it's also an economic issue. How, you know, we can say over here, pass a law that everybody will have food, but the guy on the ground, is he getting the food? That's what he's concerned about. Nah? He's not reading your papers and seeing what great things you've done in parliament. Question is he getting more food now? That is what he's going to vote on.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying this, because I recently interviewed somebody in the government who said that for the Food Security Act, to implement the Food Security Act, they were doing an elaborate socio-economic and caste survey to identify 65% population as beneficiaries. That exercise will not be over before the elections. So what you're saying is right. So
absolutely,
it wouldn't go to the beneficiaries before the elections.
So the issue. So to come back to your political question, you know, the issue of growth is there, one, and the issue of corruption and governance is there, two, and the third is the welfare transfers. Of course, there will be some positive effect of that, but the first two factors, as far as one can see from public discussion, seem to be going against the Congress. Now come to the other side. Who will benefit? Right? Well, this model is really about the incumbent, so we can say with confidence that this time the incumbent is likely to lose.
Yeah, sure.
Who will benefit is then we can get into political analysis.
That's what I'm going to the next step.
Sure.
So incumbent is in a tight corner because growth has decelerated substantially.
Significant.
So now who do you think would represent in people's perception?
So now, as far as growth and governance factors are concerned, it's kind of a mixed picture. As far as growth is concerned, and from my reading of all the information available, it seems to be very clear that it is the Modi factor, so to say, is importantly linked to that.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
And what people are talking about, this surge in support, it's not the BJP. A lot of people have pointed out, and this is something I knew even before the election. I used to talk to various people, Congress, BJP, etc. Yeah. The BJP supporters were themselves unhappy with the BJP.
Yeah, sure.
And so were the Congress supporters, for reasons we've just discussed, unhappy with Congress.
Yeah.
But the Modi factor is that he is able to convey that he has produced growth in Gujarat.
Can I point to something interesting here? Suppose you disaggregate this GDP growth model of yours and take it to the state level, you'll find that there are many states, perhaps like Orissa, possibly even Bihar, and some others like Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, maybe even Rajasthan, who have delivered possibly better growth in the last 5 years, coinciding with this 2009 to as opposed to the previous 5 years. So do you think voters there, since we are in a coalition government, a lot of regional parties run state governments, will benefit from that? States which have done much better than the average national GDP growth.
So two factors. One is because the growth from 2004 to 9 or whatever period was there was so significantly higher. Lot of state elections during that time, those who unless the state went in a contrary direction, we can discuss that, benefited from it actually. This was not true in the 2004 election. There were actually a number of contradictory results to my model. Okay.
That's
one of them, for example, in 2004 was Gujarat. So Gujarat, actually the growth was lower than their previous 5 years. Remember, my model is when voters compare this government, whichever government's 5 years with the previous 5 years, Gujarat growth was actually slower in that 2004 election. But despite that, the incumbent won. So I would not say that growth is the only factor which matters.
No, that's what I'm coming to that,
And again, in 2012-13, some of these, I forget which it was, if you take Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, in one of them growth was much higher. So it went according to the model prediction. But in another one, it was slower. So the other factors come into play. We still have two other economic factors also. One of them, which is, let's call it governance. I don't know. You want to call it Bijli Sadak or whatever.
No. So this from you, the sense I'm getting is when you talk about state elections or state leaders, it appears that issues other than those of development, relating to development, issues of identity, like Modi was clearly playing identity politics.
There was some identity.
And in Tamil Nadu, identity politics is very strong. It could be caste, it could be, it could be a Hindutva politics. So these tend to overwhelm growth factors sometimes.
Can, but I would suggest that only happens in extreme. When there are extreme events. For example, now we've had this
like the 1984 post 84 riots election.
Well, take the case right now, the Muzaffarnagar riots, right? If they had not happened, the results could have been different because SP had just won the state elections a few years ago. But it is very
just about a year ago.
A year ago. Normally, when that happens and there's no such political event, they tend to win the Lok Sabha election.
Sure.
But it seems like this time that's not going to happen. And an important reason is that something else has happened.
This is interesting. I will discuss this in a little more detail, but after a small break, please don't go away and stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Finance. Dr. Virmani, you rightly argued that growth is probably a dominant factor, but not the only factor. And we are a mishmash of identity politics, caste, majoritarian politics, all kinds of factors are at play. So you said UP, Muzaffarnagar, you said normally if Muzaffarnagar hadn't happened, SP's position probably would have been better, stronger. So you do then concede that some of these factors, they sometimes subsume the development issue or the growth factor, right?
Right. But remember, we have not discussed so much the other development factors, right? When we talked about Bijli Sadak Pani, again, the question is of how significantly improve, right? Because if there is a big improvement, then remember, we are not talking about intellectual, we are talking about the common people. They have to feel it, right? So if you make roads all over Bihar, then that will have a significant effect. We have to remember, one vote, one person. Now, if you just build roads in one small area of 10% of the state, then obviously it won't have an impact all over the state. So the Bijli Sadak Pani is very localized in that sense of the word, right? Growth is generally all over. We are taking the aggregate statistics, right? But if you have a growth, let's say the number of roads has gone up by 2%, but that 2% may be only in one little area. right? It's not all over. Okay, so you have to be a little careful even on the economic factors, right? So in Bihar, for example, when Nitish Kumar won, growth had actually gone up, but there was also this general improvement in some of the welfare, not welfare, the Bijli Sadak, if you want to call it, factors.
You know, and it's interesting that that we are discussing in the Indian context now how growth and development have come to sort of dominate or stay as very important factors in elections. That's a fact, especially in national elections. It at some level it's ironical because if you read the text of Karl Marx, he used to argue that materialism is the strongest social force in history. It is materialism which subsumes issues of identity. So in some sense, I mean, you could, in a perverse way, you could argue that what Modi is talking about, focus on development, in a way, it's a, in a perverse way, it could be a Marxist argument in the initial stage of development. So, So now, now this interplay between identity and materialist conception of history, it's at what stage do you think, as an economist or a social social scientist, economists are also social scientists, at what stage are we? Do you think that capitalism is still to fully play out and enlarge our middle classes and create a new consensus?
Right. So we are actually at the beginning of big change, in my view. Basically, you know, if we talk in broad terms now, without getting into the direct connection between growth and politics, basically the rate of growth of per capita income has doubled over the last 10 years compared to the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's a huge change. You know, that means that that average income doubles in 10 years. As I was saying, this is something the general public can feel. You know, it is not, we keep saying about distribution, but distribution changes very marginally, 0.01, 0.02. I'm not saying it's good, but what they can feel is a large change in income of this thing. So what it has done, it has created the new middle class, in my view, which I've also written about. It's, you know, so these are people who before, when growth was very slow, could never dream. Now they've seen people, they've seen other people's dreams come true. Some of them have started to dream, etc. I used to give the example of Nirbhay, whatever you want to call her, that, you know, they are from eastern UP, the poorest part of UP. They came to Delhi, they sent their daughter to study in Dehradun, you know, as against their son, and so on. So this change is happening, and I think it's going to transform the political landscape in the next 10, 15 years.
In fact, Dr. Virmani, I find it very interesting that United England in the 19th century, I was reading somewhere, 1850, England had 30% of people living in urban areas. It was urbanized 30%, which is what roughly India is today, the urbanization. And England middle class was expanding, and that was a period where all kinds of reform legislations came, including those relating to the Factories Act, minimum wages, even welfare schemes being legislated. All those things happened there. So at some stage, I mean, it's interesting that you're saying that we are at the beginning of that process, the expansion of the middle class.
Right. So we have kind of conflated, right? Because we had these legislation 50 years ago. Right. But what we haven't done is what London and other cities did around the same time. For example, build a good sewage system. That's a key, actually, in my view, to better health and nutrition. You know, people talk about that. So yes, those type of things will also happen. This urban focus, I think we've had a very large, at least a rhetorical focus on the rural areas without perhaps achieving as much as we should have. That is going to change, because really all over the world, the development agenda is really about urbanization, actually.
So,
you know.
So do you think in future governments which create these livable urban spaces and deliver it to the expanding middle class would get voted into power more and more?
That's a good point. So this relates to your first question. Absolutely right. This is the new change we are going to see, that we haven't really thought about, when we talk about culture, or we always talk about big, high culture, which only a few of us really participate in. The common culture is urban spaces. You need spaces which people have started talking about. You need areas where people can congregate peacefully and enjoy themselves and all. That some concept is just coming in.
It's interesting you're saying this, that because many sociologists actually believe that true knowledge actually resides in popular culture rather than in some rarefied intellectual spaces.
But the basis of culture is congregation, the social interaction. So you have to have places where people can interact on an equal basis. Remember, that's how caste will disappear eventually. When you are in a public space, you don't care whether the guy is from X caste or Y caste.
But meanwhile, it's interesting that that development and growth as an agenda gets a huge boost even politically. Political parties, leaders keep talking about emphasizing growth and development. But when the chips are down, when there's a 3-4 years of low growth, high inflation, somehow there's a return to identity politics. Because again, then politicians probably feel insecure and try to go back to identity, politics. And then probably when growth picks up again, they then focus again on development.
But remember, who is going back? The people who now realize, because it's too late to do anything about growth. You see, I must say, I don't want to blow my trumpet, but I've been telling all these parties, or the concerned ones, I don't want to mention, that growth is important, but they were not listening. I've been saying it for the last 4 years. It's too late now, na? So they have to think of other things. I mean, in 3 months, you're not going to revive growth. Okay? But hopefully, the message which we are giving today will be there for the next 5 years. So the parties do growth if they want to get re-elected, which will be good for all of us, I think.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Dr. Arvind Virmani. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.